Quality Group and Andy Morhonda of Bloomington.
Know your role and shut your mouth, you jabroni!
Fires upfield into the end zone, and it's caught. Jelani Woods, touchdown! ISB!
A 43-point night for Tyrese Halliburton.
How do you like that, partner?
Galloway drives all the way to the hole, throws it up.
Got it!
Indiana's got their first lead of this contest.
I mean, that's a goddamn Emmy winner right there.
Now, from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios, here's your host, Jim Coyle. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Indiana Sports Beat Radio. This is not the voice of Jim Coyle. It is, in fact, John, the producer, a.k.a. John Alden, getting you started here today on ISB. With me today, Dustin Schutte of Outsider.com. And as you all know, for those of you who have been around for segments with Dustin and I before, it's usually, you never know what direction we're going to take the show in. Yeah, we're going to play all the hits. We'll talk a little bit of conference realignment. We're going to talk with Dylan Sinn about college football. We'll talk about Indiana, Purdue, maybe a little bit of Notre Dame. And we're also going to talk with Chris Denari about the Indiana Pacers and the upcoming NBA season. But before we get into all that, Dustin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Got a full 8 hours of sleep last night. As people who are listening to this, maybe they know, John, we have started a podcast called Out of Touch. Right. And little tease is that last night we talked a lot about ghost stories, and I was petrified. So I slept on the couch.
We didn't mean to take the podcast in that direction necessarily last night.
No, we did
because
not.
It does have more of a Halloween-y feel. I think it was a great episode, but no one really expects to be talking about haunted things and ghosts and sleep paralysis and that kind of stuff in the middle of August. But yeah, we'll for those of you who have followed along so far with the podcast, we put out the first 2 episodes. That episode will release next Wednesday, so hopefully you guys will check that out. We had a lot of fun and evidently scared Dustin half to death last night that he wasn't able to sleep with the lights off, for that matter.
I did sleep. I just had the lights on. I was out here on the couch, television on. So I am a coward. I will take that. So I'm very much looking forward to talking a little bit more sports and not ghost-like things today.
Well, good. Yeah, because we'll definitely be hitting on those things. I do want to check out the Andy Morhonda hotline, though, real quick. We have a commenter, Russell Baxter, says Dustin Schutte is on. He's the one with the dog, right? Marcel or Marcy? But Jennifer quickly corrects him. Biscuit is his dog's name. And Biscuit, has he made a cameo appearance as he's sitting on the couch behind you?
No, he's just wandering around the house right now, not knowing what to do, not knowing who I'm talking to. I'm sure at some point he'll pop his big head in here. But I think also there was a confusion. Dustin DePuric has a dog named Maxine, right?
Yes, Maxine.
Okay, so we both have dogs. My dog, Dustin Schutte's dog, is Biscuit. Dustin DePuric's dog is Maxine.
And I love Biscuit as a classic dog's name. There are certain dog names that I feel like sound cliche, like Spot or Patches or something, or even just the typical Max. Like Max and Maxine are 2 different things. And no offense if your dog is named one of those things, but I just think it's a little cliche.
Well, Biscuit's name, so that's the reason I got him, was actually, so several years ago when I lived in Lafayette, Indiana, I went to I don't know if it was an apple farm. I don't know what you would call it. Some sort of farm where you pick apples. And so apple tree farm, I don't know. Anyway, point is they had a big basset hound dog, and the dog's name was Biscuit. And I thought, if I ever get a dog, I'm going to name it Biscuit. Fast forward, I don't know, maybe 4 years. And when I moved to Orlando, which is a weird place, by the way, like Indiana, Biscuit, it's a very Indiana dog name, right? Orlando, when I moved to Orlando and I was looking through the animal shelter, they obviously had him listed as Biscuit, which I thought was unique for Orlando because usually a lot of the dog names are Disney related, right? Because you're right next door. You don't usually get a lot of food dog names. So I took it as a sign, went down, visited him, played with him a little bit, and then obviously he stole my heart. So,
well, there you go. Love a good dog adoption story. For those of you wondering where Jim is today, he is actually on a flight to see some family. He unfortunately had to book a flight during the time of the show. As you all know, he would never do that on purpose. He just had to do that for the circumstances. So he will be back tomorrow to go over all the things that we may or may not miss today. But let's go ahead and dive into what do you got.
Jennifer
Dustin?
corrects me. Not apple farm, apple orchard. I could not think of the word. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Apple orchard. Thank you.
Well, there we go. Thank you, Jennifer. Let's go ahead and dive into a little bit of conference realignment, because I say unfortunately at this point because we are at that time of year where we are starved for real content. And when I say real content, I mean actual game coverage, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
We're only a couple of weeks away from that. But as far as college sports go, we have been dominated by this conference realignment stuff, not only for the past several weeks, but it seems like every offseason now for the past couple of years has been dominated by conference realignment headlines. And now it seems like we've gotten to what may be the pinnacle of all of this. The Big Ten has 18 teams currently slated to be on the or in the conference beginning next season. The SEC will have 16. And now the ACC is trying to apparently poach Cal and Stanford away from what is now, I guess, the Pac-4 until further notice.
Right.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Dustin, but doesn't Notre Dame, they're trying to make the ACC, they're really pushing for this to happen for whatever reason, even though Notre Dame isn't a full member of the conference right now.
Well, and I think the reason they are doing this, and I mentioned this on a radio program the other day, Notre Dame is going to be backed into a corner at some point. And I don't mean this from the financial standpoint. I mean this from the standpoint of they're not going to have anybody to play. What could happen, I think the reason Notre Dame wants the ACC to continue to grow and to thrive, I don't know if thrive is the right word, but at least stay afloat, is so that way they can have opponents on the schedule. Because there's a very real possibility that if Notre Dame wants to stay independent, I think they could do that financially. But the Big Ten could say, hey, you're not going to join our conference. We're not going to allow any of our teams to play you. The SEC could say the same thing. And so then what's Notre Dame left to do? They're going to have to play a bunch of what we know now is group of 5 teams and maybe some of those ACC opponents. So if the ACC were to disband or some of those teams go from the ACC to the Big Ten, the SEC, and you get 20 teams in a super conference, Notre Dame's just not going to have anybody to play. So I think that because they have the relationship in other sports, they need the ACC to stay afloat. And that's probably why they're pushing for some sort of expansion and for the ACC to continue to grow. Just because, like I said, I think financially Notre Dame's got the television revenue. They've got the opportunity. They've got the audience. They've got the alumni. They've got the donor base. It's just from an opponent standpoint. And if you're having to play San Jose State and UTEP and Army and Navy every single year because you can't land USC and Michigan and Purdue because you refused to join a conference. So I think the ACC's essentially, to make a long story longer, I think in order for Notre Dame to want to stay independent, they have to make sure the ACC stays afloat. Otherwise, they're going to have to join either the Big Ten or the SEC, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think we briefly talked about this the other day. If the Big Ten and the SEC expand, let's just say they get up to 20 teams, and maybe even further than that. Let's say the Big 12 keeps adding teams, and they end up getting to that kind of echelon as well. And maybe the ACC would as well. I really don't know. The ACC is kind of a wild card in all of this. But let's just say they kind of max out what they can do in terms of adding teams that make a difference. And they get to the point to where maybe they start flirting with either playing 10 conference games or maybe even, and this may sound wild, let's just say the Big Ten and the SEC and all these major conferences only move to playing conference opponents only.
Yeah.
That may seem out of line, and maybe it is. But when you have that many teams in one conference and you are, with your TV rights deal, meant to play those games with those teams, that's all you're going to really be able to do to get these TV networks what they want, play these marquee matchups each and every week. You won't have time for non-conference matchups. And so, again, back to your point with Notre Dame, that's why Notre Dame really is I guess pushing for the ACC to really make this move because they don't want to get left in the dark. And I don't think Notre Dame could ever truly be left in the dark because as long as like if Notre Dame ever wants to be in a conference, they'll be able to get in a conference. The Big Ten or the SEC or whoever, they're not going to deny membership to Notre Dame because of what they would bring for them.
Right. No, I completely agree with you because if they're able to sustain their athletics department based on the donorship and based on their independent contracts, and I know that they get ACC money for those other sports that they're part of with the conference. I understand all that, but imagine what they could do. And by the way, this is what I think is going to happen at some point. Notre Dame is going to join a conference. It's just a matter of time. I don't know whether that's going to be 2 years or whether it's going to be 12 years, but at some point they're going to have to join a conference. I think that's just the way this is going to go. But the Big Ten makes the most sense, does it not? Because of USC, because of Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue. You could throw in, I mean, obviously they don't have necessarily quote unquote rivalries with these teams, but Penn State, Ohio State, those would be big draws. UCLA would be a big draw. You could probably throw Wisconsin in there. That would probably be a big draw. So when I say that, would it not surprise anyone if they decided then to go to the SEC? I mean, I feel like there's a really very real possibility. Greg Sankey went on the SEC network and said, we don't need to go to the West Coast to expand our market. We don't have to add more teams. I'm just going to tell you right now, Tony Petitti said the same thing at Big Ten Media Days. He said, we're comfortable with 16 teams. You know, we are comfortable. We don't need to expand. It's all just a political game. So don't look into what these commissioners say. I think that I think that the SEC is going to push hard to get Notre Dame to join their conference. Whether or not that works, I don't know because of what we talked about with the ACC. But I think that the SEC is going to try to get Notre Dame and some other partner, whether that be Florida State, Miami. I don't know who it might be, Clemson. I think that they're going to push hard to make Notre Dame team number 17 of their conference and then whoever else they can get to join.
It'd be interesting because the SEC, every time they've expanded, I don't believe that they've ever taken a team that wasn't already connected to one of the other states they were already attached to. So it'd be the first time that the SEC really took somebody that was out of their geographical reach. So,
well, technically though, Notre Dame is in Indiana, Kentucky, Indiana, right?
But you would have it. Well, I guess that's true. You're right. They would be connected. So yeah, you got me on that.
Technically speaking,
I didn't even think about that. I forgot about Kentucky.
I'm not a geography major, but you know.
Anyway, we're going to go ahead and take our first break. Thanks for listening. This is Indiana Sports Beat Radio. This segment brought to you by the Chop Shop. We'll be right back with more right after this. We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
If you're in the
Let's see, Kevin. Oh, God.
Thank you. You don't have to tell me by my first name.
Huh?
I said he doesn't have to call me by my first name.
Oh.
What's so funny?
Taking off? You're not in flight, right? You're just on the tarmac. Okay.
And I'm going to go until it just dies.
So wait, so you're going to come back? You're going to do the show? You're not just going to sit and watch? Just sit back and watch. Enjoy the flight.
Okay, I don't care.
You can sit in the green room if you want, but don't feel like you have to do anything. By the way, K-Bro, he's asking where you're going. Do you want to go ahead and tell him real quick?
Well, this flight is going to Orlando, but that's not my destination. I'm going to see my father.
Your father.
Your father.
Indiana ranked the 5th worst Power 5 football team in FBS by Danny Sheridan. Purdue 11 out of 12.
This year? Just this year?
I don't.
And who's worse?
Fred says your kids are doing great. He's talking to you, referring to me and Dustin.
There you go.
Sounds about right. I don't see any comments for some reason.
Yes, he means this year. So Kevin does mean this year.
disappeared.
Jim looks suspicious. I was going to say, I sent John a text. We were going to witness a fight.
Oh, you dropped out.
Yeah, you can't go backwards on this thing.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't see the comments. It drives me insane.
all right. Do you care if I put you back in the green room while we come back?
I don't. Nope.
Okay. Green room audience of one. All right. Oh, we're gonna get into we're gonna do the Jeffrey the Greek's 10 or 9 most intriguing non-conference games.
Okay.
Segment. You go ahead and bring us back in.
Of a passion for beer, food, and custom metal art. Check out their custom growlers. Metalworks Brewing Company has an updated menu, new brews, and will be offered in all Endeavor Hospitality restaurants. Come taste with Dr. Hops' Brewing. Metalworks Brewing Company. Bring your passion and your thirst.
This segment is brought to you by Southern Stone Restaurant. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. The JTP and Dustin Schutte take over today as Jim is on his way to North Carolina for some family matters. Thanks for stopping by. This segment brought to you by Southern Stone Restaurant, home of the Tom Allen Show and the Don Fisher, not the Don Fisher Show, the Mike Woodson Show. Don Fisher hosts those shows, and he'll actually be rejoining the Indiana Sports Beat team here on Mondays coming up here in a couple of weeks. So you have that to look forward to. So that'll be great. Dustin, you and I are going to get into a little bit of Big Ten football talk. We just did some conference realignment in our opening segment, but our friend Jeffrey the Greek recently shared what he thought were his 9 most intriguing non-conference games of the 2023 Big Ten football season. And I was going to go through some of these and see if you thought that maybe his list was or wasn't worthy. And we'll maybe share some thoughts on some of these matchups. Also, shout out to Biscuit, who made his way into the background there.
I told you, for everybody watching on YouTube, he loves the camera.
Oh, yeah. So let's go ahead and get into this. It's Jeffrey the Greek's top 9 most intriguing non-conference games. He's got number 9. He's got West Virginia at Penn State. I don't know that they've played in the non-conference recently, have they?
Not recently that I recall, but I think that's a really interesting matchup. I know West Virginia hasn't been like obviously the West Virginia, the Rich Rod days, but I think there is a little bit of a rivalry there. I think there's a lot of high expectations for Penn State. This is a team that led the Big Ten in sacks. They were pretty good defensively a season ago. And now James Franklin thinks that unit, their defensive line, could be even better next season. So it's going to be really interesting to see that game in particular.
Yeah, that'll be good to see. Here's the thing about Penn State, and I've noticed about their fans. I feel like they have been way too critical on James Franklin's job that he's done. I don't think he's done a bad job. I think he's actually done a really good job. But maybe it's just the fact that Penn State has always kind of been third fiddle to Michigan and Ohio State. And that's just the unfortunate, the fact that they're in the Big Ten East and you have to play against those guys every year.
Well, I think if you are a Penn State fan, you should be there. I can understand both sides of this argument. I think, number one, you have to be excited about the fact that you have a program that is competitive with Michigan and Ohio State basically every single year, not every year, but essentially they've been competitive. I know they've lost some of those games, but at the same time, you got to get over that hump. You're Penn State. You got to play in some Big Ten championship games. 2016 is a long time ago, so I understand some of the frustrations, but it's not like they're 7-5 or 6-6 every single year. I mean, they rattle off 10-win seasons, and I think that this is another year where they could make some noise in the Big Ten East.
And to be fair, they did have the 2020 year where they lost their first 5 games, and they weren't the only team in the Big Ten to struggle that year, obviously, but they did have that going against them. Next up, we got Wisconsin at Washington State, one of the remaining members of the new Pac-4.
Pac-4, yeah.
I can't think of Washington State without thinking of Mike Leach, and to be honest, I can't even tell you who their head coach is right now. Their current head coach.
Yeah, that was a tough game. I'm blanking on his name. I wish I'd have looked this up. But he is a Wisconsin. He's from Wisconsin. I know that. However, this is going to be interesting because it's going to be an early look at what Luke Fickell's offense looks like. Somebody mentioned the other day Wisconsin and air raid in the same sentence, and that is just such a foreign concept to me that I think it's going to be really intriguing. Now, I don't think they're going to go full board, look like Cincinnati in year one. You still got Braylon Allen. You still should have a pretty solid offensive line. So I think it's going to be more of like a healthy 50-50 balance. But it's going to be really intriguing to see what Wisconsin's offense looks like.
Moving on to the next game, it's a rematch of a game that happened last year, Michigan State versus Washington. And as we all know, Michael Penix going to be trying to put together a Heisman Trophy campaign with the Huskies, and Kalen DeBoer also leading that team. And last year, I'm trying to find the stats from Penix. Here we go. He had almost 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Spartans last year. And I think they're expected to be better. I'm not really sure where Michigan State's expected to be, but it wouldn't surprise me if Washington takes the cake with this one.
I think Washington is in a good spot. Spoiler alert, I think Washington is one of my underdog sleeper picks to make the college football playoff. I think it's going to be kind of down to them and USC out of the Pac-12 to get that 4th.
I'll tell you what, it is. I think you muted yourself, Dustin, unless you meant to. Okay.
I'm having to take care of some dog duties here at the moment.
Okay. But anyway, yeah. So with Washington, I think we talked about this before last year. I don't think a lot of Indiana fans have any animosity toward Michael Penix. I think they understand why he made the moves that he did. But I got to say, as a fan, it's got to be a little difficult, especially if Washington does make a run, to just not at least think, what if things didn't work out for the better with somebody like that? A generational talent that Indiana may or may not see again in several years. I mean, and who knows how long that would be.
Well, you see, because Washington has a competent offensive line and Indiana has not. So that's the biggest difference. And Michael Penix's health was a consistent issue at Indiana. I hope that's not I hope he stays healthy. For his sake, I hope he stays healthy at Washington. I would like to see them make a run. It would be a really cool story, I think.
It would. All right, number 6 on Jeffrey the Greek's list. Iowa at Iowa State. It wouldn't be a Jeffrey the Greek list if it didn't include the Cyhawk matchup, correct?
Yeah, I have not. So this is a spoiler too. I have not looked at this list. So that one does not intrigue me very much. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that I'd put that on my top 9.
And I know there's the last couple of years, there's been a lot of hype surrounding that game just because of the expectations that were surrounding Iowa State, but Iowa State never lived up to the billing. And so I think I'm with you. Even though it may end up being a good game, I don't think it's going to be the marquee matchup that it was kind of advertised as the past couple of years. But
I think there's a possibility it's a good game in terms of entertaining and close. I don't think it's going to be one of the marquee matchups. Like I said, once we get through this list, maybe I'll change my mind. But
next up, we've got Indiana versus Louisville in Lucas Oil Stadium, and obviously one of the biggest intrigues of this matchup, especially from people who are fans of the Big Ten more so than just fans of these programs, is the fact that it's Indiana versus Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom gets a crack at his old rival with his old alumni. Am I saying that correctly? With his alumni team, whatever you want to call it.
Alma mater.
His alma mater. There we go. We're
having trouble with words today.
Words are hard sometimes. But yeah, it'll be a good barometer, honestly, for both teams. Indiana will have already played Ohio State and Indiana State. Louisville will have played Georgia Tech and Murray State. And so it'll really be a good chance to see where both teams are. I know Louisville's got a lot of expectations under year one with Jeff Brom, and they're expecting a lot of things from his offense. and Indiana's just expecting to take a step forward in hopes of turning things around. So I think it could be a good game. It could also not be a good game. And it really could be kind of I don't want to say the winner of this game it'll kind of be a trajectory starter for the rest of their season, but whoever wins, it's definitely a good sign for, I think, the rest of the next few games, if that makes sense.
You missed an important opportunity for a pun there. The Jeff barometer, the Jeff barometer for both teams. No, I think this game. So I think going into this game, you look at what Jeff Brom did his first year at Purdue. I think he can do something similar at Louisville. And so if I'm an Indiana fan, that part worries me. Plus, he knows this Indiana team as well as anybody, having to play them for so many years. The one thing I would say, though, is that this game is way more important for Indiana than it is for Louisville. I think people have said that Louisville has the easiest schedule in Power 5 football this year. But aside from that, Louisville's not going to quit on Jeff Brom after 1 year. I don't think this is going to happen, but even if they go 3-9, they might be frustrated. But if you can at least see progress, Indiana, Tom Allen, there's no question, is on the quote unquote hot seat this season. So, and if you want to get to a bowl game, I think we've discussed on this show, you pretty much got to win that game. So it adds a level of intrigue for sure. Again, I don't know that it's one of maybe there's not 9 good non-conference games. I don't know.
We've got a couple of better ones coming up, I believe. Ones that you may see as the marquee matchups. Number one and this sounds like clickbait. Number one may surprise you. We'll get to that here in a little bit. Number 4, Ohio State at Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'd put that one higher.
Okay. And this is a rematch. They played last year at Buckeye. I almost said it's not Buckeye Stadium. It's Ohio Stadium.
Ohio Stadium. Yep. Yeah, I'd put that one. That one stands out to me. I know Notre Dame didn't quite have the season, but they got things rolling a little bit towards the end after those first few weeks.
Yeah, the thing with Notre Dame, if you want to be off to a better start it's Marcus Freeman, correct? That's his name?
Yes. Yep.
Just don't lose to Marshall or teams that are the equivalent of Marshall. You don't want to set off that fan base. But, another rematch game. Next up, number 3, Minnesota at North Carolina. Interesting draw right there. You got the northernmost Big Ten team versus, just geographically, I don't really care where North Carolina is, but it's a non-conference matchup that I don't really see what initially got these two teams together. You know what I mean? Is there a coaching tie somewhere? Wonder why Minnesota and North Carolina decided to play each other.
That's a good question. I don't know. These things come to fruition. I'm sure it's when the Big Ten eliminated FCS opponents for that brief period in which they did. I'm sure that the athletic departments, I don't want to say were scrambling, but they were probably trying to just find other opponents, more powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's cool. I wish there were more matchups like that where you were playing teams that, aren't necessarily geographically close by, but it's still a cool, Big Ten versus ACC like we have right here. All right, moving on. Number 2, Nebraska at Colorado. I think that's a good spot for it, just considering where both programs are at right now. 2 brand new head coaches. And when I say brand new, obviously they've been head coaches in other places, but it's their first year at these programs. Deion Sanders, obviously making all the headlines this offseason. Matt Rule, there's always high expectations in Lincoln. I don't know how he'll be able to meet those in year 1 necessarily. I guess just don't be Scott Frost. And Deion Sanders, you just want to be competitive with Colorado, I feel like.
I think that's a good assessment for Colorado. You just want to be competitive because they're not a very good program. I think that Colorado could potentially be a disaster based on what has happened throughout the offseason. I don't know. That's just my thought. So what's the title of this? The 9 games of, is it the most interesting?
It's the top 9 most intriguing non-conference games.
Okay,
so it's not necessarily the best.
Okay, I got you. I was like, I don't know if I'd put that towards the best. It is intriguing. I think Nebraska. So I do think Nebraska's going to be better, and I think Matt Rule has the right mindset and attitude to get the program back to where it needs to go. I think that you look at their schedule. I think that 6 wins is probably is feasible. It's very doable. Let me put it that way. To get that back to a bowl game, that would be a huge first step. And so for the Nebraska side, you have to win this game though. Like Colorado is not good. Like Deion's not going to do a lot of great things in year one. I think Nebraska at least has the talent there to make some strides. You got to win this game.
Yeah, and honestly, if Scott Frost was still the head coach, I think I'd be more excited to see how disastrous this game could be. But obviously, we're not in that era anymore. But I'll miss the Scott Frost antics, like kicking an onside kick when you're up 14 against Northwestern, or silly things like that happened last year. But all right, number one, as I said earlier, it may surprise you, and maybe you'll disagree. Illinois at Kansas.
I think this game is really intriguing because of the way Kansas improved last year, because of the way Illinois was in the division race for the Big Ten West last season, basically until the final week of the season. That game is, so again, not the best. This is why when he had Ohio State and Notre Dame at 4, I was like, I don't know what's happening now. So intriguing. Yes, I think this is one of the more intriguing games, and I'm glad he mentioned this on the list because these are two programs that you'd probably put it on an intriguing matchup if you were talking about college basketball, right? But these are two programs that are on the rise, or at least headed in the right direction. And so that's going to be a really fun matchup, I think.
Yeah, so there you go. That's Jeffrey the Greek's top 9 most intriguing non-con games. We'll be checking in with Jeffrey the Greek more so on a weekly basis here once we get into the meat of college football season. So we're definitely looking forward to reconvening with JTG and hearing all of his thoughts on who he's putting game parlays on and those things that I don't know a whole lot about. But here's the thing. I am very excited that sports betting is going to be legal in my state of Kentucky. For those of you who don't know, I produce a show out of Kentucky. And so we'll finally be able to be, I think, beginning in September, or maybe it's just sometime next month, be able to legally bet on stuff. And I'm excited to test the waters with that and see.
You're excited.
I'm just excited to be able to have a stake. I'm excited to be able to have the opportunity to put a stake on a game that otherwise I wouldn't give a crap about. That's why people love Maction, the Fun Belt. What are some of those other fun conference names that people throw out there? I think those are the two main ones that people say.
Those are the only two I can think of.
I know people say the Mountain Worst to reference the Mountain West, but that's
pretty
different.
Good. That's pretty good.
But yeah, there you go. Those were not our most intriguing games. We were giving our thoughts on JTG's most intriguing games. But coming up next, we've got our friend Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. We're going to talk a little more Indiana football and also hear his thoughts on Purdue and probably a little Notre Dame as well. So you're listening to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. This segment was brought to you by Southern Stone and Go Team, and we'll be back right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Whether it's...
All right, you're about to see Biscuit get wrapped in a blanket.
A little behind the scenes.
He will not stop licking, and he's doing it to act out. So you're going to get wrapped in a blanket, bud.
Look at that. We love Biscuit.
Biscuit in a blanket. He will undoubtedly get out of this.
I do the same thing to my dog sometimes when we're on the couch.
There you go. No, stop.
He looks like he's like a sick old man or something.
Yep. He just needs to take a nap. We've already been out. He got his breakfast.
Russell comments, Biscuit says, don't touch me.
He is very annoyed at this present moment.
It's interesting.
I do the same for Rascal, his cat. There you go. See? You gotta keep these pets in line somehow. So Dylan's up next.
Yeah, Dylan will finish out the first hour with us, and then we'll be by ourselves again to start 9:30. Chris Denari will come on at 9:50, and then we'll have the last segment to ourselves.
Perfect.
I think I'll spend the last segment. We'll talk a little more about Out of Touch and that kind of stuff.
Sounds good. We could probably get Dylan's thoughts too on realignment.
Yeah, I was thinking about that for sure. I don't think we've talked to him since all this stuff has been going on. He's had to cancel on us the past couple of weeks because of he's been at practices for Purdue and Indiana.
Oh, okay.
Whenever he's supposed to be on, so
gotcha.
And he ain't afraid to give the hard truth. He's always been. He'll probably talk about how crappy Indiana's going to be, and it's fine.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, you never know. You don't know
for Indiana. It's honestly, it's just for me. It's not about expectation. It's just hoping that they improve at this point. I know that there's not a lot expected, and really to me, and I've seen a lot of other people mention this. If Bob Bostad can genuinely fix the offensive line, I think you can at least. I mean, that gives you an opportunity to win probably at least 2 or 3 more games that you weren't able to win previously. If you can fix that line.
This is what I'm saying. Everybody keeps talking about. Well, I don't know about everybody keeps talking about. That's probably an over-exaggeration. But there is like a bowl or bust mentality among a lot of Indiana fans, and I don't think that's the case. At Indiana, if you can get to 5 wins and be more competitive in some of those games, and you look better on the offensive line, then that should be good enough. Like,
especially with a freshman quarterback. And we'll save this. We'll save this conversation for when we come back. We got about 40 seconds. I'm sure Dylan will pop in shortly.
Hopefully, otherwise we'll just talk about it.
If not, we can still talk about Indiana and Purdue.
Yeah.
We both have thoughts about that.
I always have thoughts.
Thought. THOT. You always have thoughts.
Tots and pears.
All right, here we go.
With no extra charge. So leave the heavy lifting to us and enjoy healthy eating with stocked meals in your fridge. Order online today at thefreshfork.com. Fresh Fork is a proud partner of WOW Network. This segment is brought to you by Remax Advanced Realty, Indie Home Pros team by Cheryl Sizemore. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Again, it's a JTP Dustin Schutte takeover day as Jim is off, and will be back with us tomorrow. We are still waiting on Dylan Sinn to join us. We are expecting him to. We're going to talk a little bit of Indiana and Purdue football, and we're going to do that regardless of whether he pops in with us or not. But that was one of the things we had planned to talk about with him. So, actually, Dustin, I'm going to clear my throat for 1 second if you don't mind. So,
you're going to have me go on you're going to have me go on a filibuster about this. I mean, I think. Look, this is going to be really interesting as John chokes on his water.
We're appears. Good. We're good. I had to get that out of my system.
So I think there's a little bit more added intrigue with this season because you know that this is the last hurrah, right? Like this is kind of like Michael Jordan's last dance, Chicago Bulls, 1998. I hate that reference because I hate the Bulls. Big Pacers fan. Hated Michael Jordan growing up. But anyway, this is like the end of I don't want to say, well, I mean, I guess it is kind of the end of an era. And I know that the Big Ten with Maryland and Rutgers and the expansion, and you can even throw Nebraska in this mix. It's not like they've been here for decades. It's been basically a decade that those schools have been here. But it still feels like this is the last real Big Ten season we're going to have. So there's, I guess, anxiety is not the right word, but it's like, I don't even have man, we are struggling with words. I need to have a dictionary beside me when I do this show so I can look up what I'm trying to say. So it's just, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting season because it's going to be the last one of the traditional Big Ten, new traditional Big Ten, SEC, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'll
tell you what, though, I'm looking forward to, but I'm also frustrated with the Big Ten and the way they do scheduling. I've talked about this a couple of times this week as well with Jim.
From the Indiana side,
I don't understand why. I mean, I guess I do kind of understand why, because they keep expanding. But it aggravates me every time the Big Ten puts out a new schedule and then less than a few months go by and they have to scrap it and they redo it all again. And I really thought this time, especially because they released 2024 and 2025, and Indiana had a really favorable draw in both years. And now with this scrapping of schedules, I just don't think the Big Ten, I mean, unless they're going to try to keep them mostly the same, which maybe they will, but I don't see the Big Ten, going out of their way to give Indiana a break again. You know what I mean? Maybe it happened by coincidence this time around.
I don't know if they're going to give Indiana a quote unquote break. I mean, I don't know that they gave.
Because I don't know if you saw the schedule. I mean, I know you saw them, I'm sure, but I don't know if you looked at Indiana specifically. In 2024, they were going to avoid Ohio State and Michigan altogether. They weren't going to have to play USC, and UCLA was coming to Bloomington. So you were avoiding a West Coast travel game. You weren't playing two of the conference's top brands. And you still have Penn State. I think you still have Wisconsin. But everybody else on that schedule, on the conference schedule, was beatable from a typical perspective, if you know what I'm saying.
They were more of the middle of the road type of schedule as opposed to
it was more of a nothing against the Big Ten West, but it was more of a Big Ten West style of schedule.
Sure, that makes sense. No, I think so. What's interesting to me about this whole scheduling model is the Big Ten tries to find a balance. And we talk about Indiana getting the short end of the stick in some of these with having to play teams like Ohio State the first week of the season. Also, Nebraska's been punched in the face by the Big Ten in terms of scheduling because they have such a big fan base that they've had to play Michigan and Ohio State pretty regularly because they know that those games are going to get viewership. And the reason they probably don't have Indiana against Ohio State and Michigan and some of these big-time opponents is because Indiana just doesn't, on the football side, have a big draw. There's not going to be a big audience for that. So you may see – so Indiana moving forward, my point being is that you may see them only play one of those teams because people are going to want to see more USC versus Nebraska, Michigan, Ohio State, obviously, UCLA versus Wisconsin. And so when you don't have a big draw, maybe that plays into an advantage for Indiana moving forward. I don't really know. But don't think that this is the bottom line. Don't think that the Big Ten is like purposefully trying to screw Indiana or give them a favorable schedule.
I don't think that they would purposely do that.
It's all about TV. It's all about TV.
Yeah.
Again, that's why you look at the crossover schedule, and I'm not throwing shade at anybody here, but Iowa tends to get a pretty favorable draw in terms of their crossover opponents, and then Nebraska does not, and that's all because of eyeballs. It's all because of who's going to tune into those games. And so that's what I think the Big Ten is going to have to try to balance. And I said this the other day, too. What's going to be interesting is I was asked how this affects some of those traditional rivalry games that they have, the protected rivalries. The Big Ten's probably going to have to scrap some of that. I think Minnesota did they keep all three? I can't remember. Did they keep Iowa, Wisconsin?
I think Minnesota kept all of theirs. One interesting thing, Penn State was the only school, at least before Oregon and Washington were added, Penn State was the only school that had 0 protected rivalries.
Right. And so I think the Big Ten I don't remember if Minnesota had 2 or 3. I don't remember what it was. But my point is all those that have multiple protected rivalry games, those maybe Iowa had 3. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Because Michigan State wasn't going to be protected with Indiana, but Purdue was.
Right. And so I think Purdue, Illinois is a protected rivalry game. I think it's going to be just Purdue, Indiana. Basically what I'm getting at is I think everybody in the Big Ten is going to have one protected rivalry game instead of multiple.
I think that's a fair assessment. Let's go ahead and bring in our good friend from the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, Dylan Sinn. Dylan, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you guys? Thanks for having me on.
Doing good. Just talking a little bit of Big Ten football. Obviously, realignment has been one of the biggest discussions over the past couple of weeks, but we're also, I know you've been visiting both Indiana and Purdue football practices and probably a little bit of Notre Dame as well.
Sure.
Where do you want to start? Let's start with a little bit of Indiana, since this is typically what we talk about. What are kind of your impressions on where Tom Allen has his team right now as they get ready for the fall?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest impressions that we've gotten, and we talked about this a little bit with Tom Allen yesterday, was that Dexter Williams is a little bit further along in his injury recovery than I think people expected. So obviously the quarterback competition this offseason has been Taven Jackson and Brendan Sorsby, 2 redshirt freshmen that haven't started a game for IU yet. Yep. And one of them will start week 1. But Dexter Williams, who started the end of last season that everyone seemed to think was playing very well, is further along in his recovery from his knee injury than people thought. Tom Allen has said previously that it would be mid-season before he'd be back. He said yesterday that it could be a game or two before that. If all continues to go well, he's doing better than even he thought. So that's good to hear for IU. And then beyond that, the impression that I've gotten is that the offensive line is a little more cohesive this year than it was last year. I think that Bob Bostad has come in. The players respect him. They like him. IU has 4 starters back from last year, including Matthew Bedford, who did not play after the first game because he tore his ACL. So you might see a little bit better line play for IU than you did last year, which would be huge for this team.
Yeah, and that's kind of, and I'll hand it to you in a second, Dustin. I feel like that's something Dustin and I were discussing earlier too. The offensive line, and Kevin Wilson used to always emphasize this as well. If you can have a competent offensive line, that gives you such a big advantage that you don't even realize how important it is until you don't have it. And so if Indiana really is able to take the next steps forward in the offensive line department, I mean, the sky's definitely not the limit for Indiana, but they're definitely going to be able to have their way more often than not when it comes to their offense.
Yeah, I think that the skill position players are really good, and I think IU has really good running backs. I think they have really good wide receivers, kind of across the board, that are going to be able to make plays for whoever the quarterback is, if you can protect the quarterback even a little bit, right? Like last year, they were not able to do that. They were really poor in run blocking and in pass blocking, which is not a combination that you want. And part of it was because they didn't have a lot of continuity, right? When Bedford got hurt in the first game, basically they had to reshuffle everything, and they kind of had to reshuffle everything repeatedly the rest of the season because of that, kind of threw everything into chaos. Now he's back. He said he's been healthy since basically summer workouts. So that's huge for them. He's a guy who started for them for 4 years, all Big Ten guy in 2021. And they expected big things from him last year. So, but it's also the mindset on the line, right? We talked to a bunch of them, and they know that they were kind of perceived as the weak link last year, whether fair or not. I think a lot of it was fair. They were the one that had their position coach get removed in the middle of the season. And they're kind of focused on making sure that doesn't happen again, which is huge for this team.
And we're talking with Dylan Sinn of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. Dylan, I think one of the things that makes your position unique, as you put a lot of miles on your car to travel to different practices,
Sure.
is that I think when you have beat reporters, beat writers who cover specifically one team, I think it's easy to kind of get lost in the idea that, well, this team looks really good because you're only seeing them against that team. You've had an opportunity to see multiple fall camps, multiple teams in practice. Where would you say Indiana is maybe along those offensive line? Because I do think that's the biggest issue compared to maybe Purdue and Notre Dame. Like, is there significant improvement on there? Like, or how does it compare to Purdue and Notre Dame? And I know that's a tough question to answer,
Sure.
But is it at least comparable, do you think?
I think it's at least comparable to Purdue. I think Notre Dame obviously has one of the best offensive lines in the country and will continue to do so this year. I will say that for all the NFL draft heads out there, Joe Alt, the left tackle at Notre Dame, is considered to be a potential top 5 pick in next year's draft, maybe the first non-quarterback off the board. And boy, does he live up to that. He is a monster. He's really, really good. By the way, so is Benjamin Morrison, the Notre Dame cornerback, who will be a first-round pick in 2024. He's only a sophomore. I booked that right now. That dude is awesome. But no, I think IU is still, it's comparable to Purdue, but Purdue has a pretty good line itself, right? There's some returning guys there that they like. They obviously losing Eric Miller and Spencer Holsteg, who were starters last year, to transfer was tough, especially losing Miller to Louisville after spring practice. That's not what you want. But they do have Marcus Embo, the freshman All-American last year at left guard. He might be moving to tackle this year. It's kind of unclear. So they have some, I think the way to put it is that Purdue has more questions, but they also have more talent on the line. I think IU has more continuity, but they're not like the guys that they have back have not been quite as good in the past. So it's a question of what you want, right? It's do you want continuity, or do you want guys that have proven that they can play with some more questions?
Speaking of Purdue, obviously they're going to have a brand new head coach with Ryan Walters, formerly of Illinois. Where do you think expectations should be set for him with what he has inherited from Jeff Brom's, former roster, do you think that, I mean, obviously it won't be the exact same style of team, but do you think that they can at least come close to replicating that kind of success? And I don't mean that they're going to win the West Division, but can they be competitive?
I think they can. I think there's been some talk about, they're going to go 5-7 or they're going to go 4-8. It's going to be a tough first year. I don't really know if that's true. I don't expect them to win the West again. I think last year was kind of a confluence of not only Purdue having a very good season, but Wisconsin being down. I don't expect that to be the case again. I kind of expect Wisconsin to walk this year, honestly. But I do think Purdue will be competitive. I would expect a bowl game in Ryan Walters' first year. They did lose a lot of talent. That is true. They lost Charlie Jones. They lost Payne Durham. They lost Aiden O'Connell. That's almost all of your passing game right there. But they really like Hudson Card. I keep telling people that they are really, really high on Hudson Card, not only in the passing game, but in the running game. They keep saying that he's hitting home runs in practice in the run game, which is interesting. And then the problem is the receivers, right? I don't know how many guys they have that are actually going to be able to catch the ball on a regular basis. They have a lot of guys who have played for them before, and none of them have really been significant contributors before. And then they brought in a guy from Florida Atlantic named Jamal Adreen, who was really good for Florida Atlantic as a freshman last year, obviously deserved to step up to Power 5. Now, the problem with him is that he just tore his ACL and is out for the season. So that's a big blow. That's a guy they were counting on to really kind of give them a deep threat right away as some of these other guys step into bigger roles. He was the only one that had been a primary target in the past. And so that's going to be a significant detriment for them, and it might take the passing game a little bit longer to come along. Now, the running game should be fine, right? Devin Mockabee is a very, very good runner. I think they like him a lot. Tyrone Tracy, who's been a wide receiver last year, has moved to running back. They like him a lot, kind of a thunder and lightning combination there. So I like what they're doing on offense. The defense, it's kind of more of a question mark. They have some guys back. Cam Allen, the safety, is a guy who's been all Big Ten in the past. Very, very solid. Nick Carraway, who has changed his last name, and I'm so sorry to Nick Carraway. I don't remember what he has changed his name to. I have changed his last name, but he is a monster off the edge. They really, really like him. So he's the perfect type of player for Ryan Walters' defense, right? He's a guy that's just going to create havoc up front. And then you hope that Walters' defense can be a little bit, basically give you an advantage in that area, kind of help your talent level play up. So I would expect them to win some games they're not supposed to win. You have a really interesting start to the season with Fresno State, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, 3 teams that we like Purdue, we don't know what to expect from. So it'll be interesting to see if they can get through that stretch 3-0, which is not off the table at all. I think that they could be in for a good season.
Really quick, Dylan, off the field and going up to South Bend, Notre Dame and conference realignment. I mean, it's pretty. We were talking about this earlier. It seems like Notre Dame wants the ACC to stay intact, not just because they are a member of the ACC and everything but football, but at the same time, because they're going to need opponents at some point. So I feel like they're going to have to depend on the ACC's survival in order to stay afloat financially in terms of the independence. Where does Notre Dame stand? What's their stance? Nothing's out of the question at this point, right? Like I think at some point down the road, they're going to have to join a conference. Is there any sort of murmurings, any sort of whisperings happening right now about Notre Dame and what their next plan of action might be?
Well, so here's what they've said. They've continued to say this, and it's the same now, is that they are going to be independent as long as it's possible for them to have a path to the national championship while being independent, right? And I think you're right. I think they're going to have to join a conference eventually, not because of anything else, but because I think the conferences that remain, if the ACC falls apart in like 5 years, within 5 years, which seems pretty likely to me, because Florida State just wants out so badly and Clemson's going to follow. And then what is the ACC, right? I think that Notre Dame will have to join a conference eventually, because once the ACC goes away, the remaining conferences are going to be really incentivized to bring Notre Dame into the fold. And the way they're going to do that my guess would be by making it very, very, very difficult for an independent to make the playoff and or win the national championship, right?
Well, yeah. And to that point, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry,
but
to that point, I feel like if I'm Notre Dame, I want to. I understand the appeal and wanting to stay independent, but to that point, isn't there some sort of temptation to strike while the iron's hot? Because at some point, if Notre Dame is left stranded and they have to join a league, isn't that league going to say, "Hey, you know what? You took your sweet time. Here's $40 million. When if you would have joined 4 years ago, you could have made $80 million."
Right. And I think there's going to be, I don't think we've reached that point yet where they're feeling that pressure. I think that's kind of maybe what their moves to try to get ACC and or to try to get Stanford and California into the ACC are kind of about, to try to stabilize that league. I do think there's going to be a tipping point. At some point, it's going to be up to Notre Dame's new athletic director, Pete Bebequois from NBC. He takes the job next summer when Jack Swarbrick retires. It's going to be up to him to know when that moment is, right? I don't think we've reached it quite yet. I think Notre Dame is still happy where it is, especially with the way conference realignment is going right now. They're kind of standing apart from all of the chaos, and I think they like that. They don't have to deal with any of that right now. They'll probably wait until things settle down, see where things stand, see what they can get in their next TV deal from NBC, which is huge. That's coming up in 2025. They're negotiating it right now. That's why they hired Bebequois from NBC as the new athletic director. So they're hoping to get a huge raise from their current TV deal. It pays them about $26 million in all. They're hoping to get up to around $75 million to kind of stay within striking distance of the Big Ten in terms of the TV money. If NBC gives them that, personally, I don't think NBC will. I don't think NBC is incentivized to do so. And in fact, they're incentivized to do the opposite, because they can say, well, we can't give you this money if you're independent, but we, NBC, have a stake in the Big Ten. Why don't you come join us? You know, like I feel like that's how a lot of those negotiations are going to go, and we'll see whether that puts pressure on Notre Dame. And then in addition to that, the college football playoffs contract is up with ESPN at the end of 2025. So for 2020, we've already had one new playoff format for 24 and 25. There might be another new format going into 26 because there's going to be a new television contract. And so my guess would be the conferences try to make it a little bit more difficult for the independents to get a playoff spot starting in 26. Notre Dame has a seat at the table with those discussions, but obviously they're only one. It's basically the conference commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director are kind of hanging out in a room figuring this out. And that's a huge position of power for Notre Dame. But how long does that last? Those other conference commissioners are incentivized to make sure that doesn't happen forever, right? And so they're going to try to put the squeeze on them here soon as well. And my guess is this comes to a head pretty soon, within 3 or 4 years would be my guess.
What's coming up next for you, Dylan?
Well, we have right now. I have a lot of high school and college. I'm like you guys said, I'm going to all 3 camps: Notre Dame, Purdue, IU, kind of all over the place. I have a story just today on what we talked about earlier with the Indiana offensive line. I'll be at Notre Dame tomorrow in South Bend for I believe it's the wide receivers we're talking to, and then I have a lot of high school preview stuff. High school football starts next Friday in Indiana, 8 days from today. So I will have previews of several Northeast Indiana teams coming up next week. So thank you guys.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us, Dylan, especially with our silly behinds. Instead of having Jim with us, we appreciate you making the time for the JTP and Dustin Schutte takeover. So
absolutely, guys. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks, Dylan. We'll be right back with more. This segment was brought to you by Barber Pop Real Estate Services and Remax Advanced Realty with Cheryl Sizemore. We'll be right back with more Indiana Sports Beat Radio right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
If you're in the market.
Oh. John?
Yes, sir.
I did a leg workout the other day, and sitting in that same position for an hour did not help.
All right, I'm going to go use the restroom real quick while I've got a moment, so I'll be right back.
I'm loading up coffee. I suppose I'm going to be in charge of entertaining the YouTube audience while we're on a break. The only teams in the West, Forrest says, in my opinion, the only teams in the West that Indiana could be competitive with year in, year out is Northwestern and Purdue. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think you see waves of teams like we saw probably not the Wisconsins, but we've seen Iowa at times. I mean, Iowa's pretty solid, but I think Indiana can be competitive. I know that they weren't a few years ago in that season opener. Illinois up and down. So I think that there are a couple teams consistently. Minnesota is a solid program, but they don't blow anybody out. Phillip, Iowa had 3 protected games, so maybe that's the one I'm thinking of, Iowa. So that's probably going to get knocked down to 1 or 2, whether that be Minnesota, Wisconsin, I'm not sure. Steve, will the Big Ten add more teams in the future? Absolutely. My guess is it's going to get to 20, maybe even 24. Five Left says we were doing so well until Dustin said he hates MJ. Five Left's, it's strictly a fan thing, man. He prevented the Pacers from getting to the finals in '98, and I still contest that's the best Indiana Pacers team. So it's nothing personal. It's like Michael Jordan in the last dance. Like, I took that personally. I mean, the Pacers didn't get to the finals that year. I took that personally.
Fred, I'm curious what you mean the Young Guns will have a challenge to edit the 1 hour Fort Wayne. I edit the hour Fort Wayne every day. Oh, no.
Look at JTP.
Unless it means like picking segments, I usually just take the first hour of the show as long as it's a good hour.
JTP out here flexing. I do that anyway.
Hey, why not? Five Left says, "Get over it, Dustin. Be happy they made it to Game 7."
Well, I can't, man. I just one of those things I could not get over. That would be an interesting conversation. What play or what moment in sports history still haunts you to this day?
Haunts me? I don't have as many as some people probably do.
I don't have a lot, but that Game 7, Pacers Bulls 1998. Oh.
Here, you can bring up this comment when we come back if you want to get into that. All right, here we go.
On staff to help you with your selections. Feast also provides a wide variety of cheeses, gourmet sandwiches, entrees, a coffee bar, bread, pastries, all made fresh and mouthwatering. Stop by Feast Market and Cellar today.
This segment is brought to you by Feast Market and Cellar. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Man, I love this music bump. I don't know why, but it just gives me Creed early 2000s soft rock vibes. And that's why I put it in one of the returns today. So and I mentioned before too the return of Creed on their Creed cruise. I don't know if we're going to get into that today, but it is mentioned in the first episode of the Out of Touch podcast. If that's something you're interested in hearing about, but Dustin, you were kind of having a side conversation with Five Lefts during the break there, weren't you?
Yes, I'm a big fan of Five Lefts. And I said earlier last segment that I hate MJ, and it's strictly because I'm a Pacers fan, because in 1998, actually there's 2 reasons. The biggest one is 1998 and Game 7, the Bulls beat the Pacers. I still contest that's the best Pacers team we've ever seen, the best chance they had to win an NBA Finals, even the 2000 team that made it to the Finals and took on Kobe and Shaq and the Lakers and lost in 6 games. And the other one was, and Five Lefts is probably going to bash me for this one too, but there was a fight. I don't remember what year. Was it 93? Maybe it was even earlier. I don't know, 93, 94, when Jordan and Reggie Miller got into a fight, and both players should have been kicked out of the game, but there was only one player kicked out of the game, and his name was Reggie Miller, and Michael Jordan got to stay because obviously he was the big appeal. Everybody, that's why people went to see him. I understand why they did it, but I'm still bitter, man. I hold a grudge. Five Lefts. Now, but that brought up a question. I am still not over that series. Like, it is, what is it, 25 years? Golly, I'm old. 25 years later, and I am still not over the Pacers losing to the Bulls in Game 7 of the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals. So, my question then is, and people listening on YouTube, send us a message here in the comments. Is there a moment, is there a game, is there a season that you just cannot get over? Is there something that still haunts you to this day? I'm asking you this question too, JTP. It can be recent. It can be one play. It can be one moment. It can be a game, or like I said, maybe even a season where you went in with high expectations and then just like, what the hell happened, man?
Yeah, I think that when you mention that, there's an obvious answer, and that's the 2021 Indiana football season. When you come off of what was the most unexpected year in 2020 with COVID, and you knock off so many bad pieces of history by beating Michigan, you beat Wisconsin, you go toe to toe with Ohio State. I mean, you were legitimately a win against Ohio State away from playing in the Big Ten championship. And then if that happens and you win that game, you are undoubtedly in the college football playoff, which is something that obviously we didn't utter those words back then. We're not uttering them then. We're just talking hypothetical. But I don't know if Indiana football will ever be in that position again. And I hate to say that, but that's just the way that the cookie crumbles sometimes. But that's definitely the most frustrated and disappointed I've ever been, just because I knew there was a way that things could go wrong that year. And Dustin, you actually laid it out very clearly. You're like, Indiana plays Cincinnati and Iowa in their first 3 games. You had Idaho sandwiched in between. They could very well be 1-2, and they were. That's exactly what happened. They got blown out by Iowa. Michael Penix threw an interception on the very first play of the game. And I don't know if you remember this, Dustin, but in the very first episode of the This Week in Indiana Football podcast, I said, what happens if Michael Penix throws a pick in the opening drive? And your response was, don't do it again. And That's exactly what he did. He did it again. So I don't know if we're our own version of Nostradamus here, but Indiana, that season falling off the rails was... And again, I'm 25 years old. So those of you who are listening have been around and you've seen for example, I see somebody mentioning the 75 Hoosiers. That was the undefeated team that lost in the NCAA tournament before, the year where they actually won the whole thing, went undefeated. I can see that being heartbreaking. But for me, as somebody who's not experienced a ton of sports heartbreak, and there's other examples, but the one, I guess, at least recently that stands out is that 2-10 season where everything just went off the rails.
I think that's a good answer. We've got Mike Ham saying Malice in the Palace. The Pacers had a really good team that year. They were going to be an NBA Finals contender, and then obviously that season derailed. 5 Left says Notre Dame against Boston College in 1993. I can't get over that game. So Howie says the 75 Hoosiers, like John just mentioned. So I'm telling you, there are certain things that that just pop into my mind for no reason. And usually it's during the NBA playoffs, but that's one that I just can't get over. So there's some good. Howie also says if Bird would have stayed, think the run maybe 4 or 5 in a row. Mike says 92 Indiana versus Duke. I mean, you're going to have a lot of good answers here because it's like, this is where to me, and I could be wrong here, but I feel like in that age range that you are in right now, John, like 10 to 25, that's when like you're at your sports fandom most, like it's the nostalgia of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where a lot of the pain comes from. You just go back to that childhood memory, how excited you were, and then how devastating you were. Here's another one. The Colts Steelers, that Hail Mary, what year was that? 95 maybe? The Colts and the Steelers were playing in a playoff game, and the Super Bowl was on the line. Jim Harbaugh, captain comeback, launches a pass into the end zone. I can't remember the intended target, but it looked like he caught the pass from the TV angle because there were so many Pittsburgh defenders, like caught a Hail Mary pass, but it hit the turf. And I remember being, however old I was, 7, 8, and just crushed that he dropped that pass because I thought the Colts were going to the Super Bowl. So there's a couple of them. There's not a lot that I have, but it's a fun conversation. Fred, Houston losing to NC State on the final shot in 1983. Joseph, what about 2013 IU losing to Kentucky in the tournament? That's a good answer.
I don't know if so much of that is heartbreak as it is just like you hate that they were able to get their revenge on you that year.
Yeah,
because not only did they get their revenge and they didn't destroy you, but they beat you by 12. They went on to win the national championship. So it completely erases the impact that the Watt shot not had on Indiana, but had on Kentucky.
Yeah, that's a fair thing because that's what relaunched Indiana's program back into national relevance. So that shot was still critical in terms of Indiana's importance, but you're right. In terms of derailing Kentucky's season, it essentially had no impact. So that's a good call by you.
Yeah.
That season had so much promise. Joseph chimes in, and
I'll tell you one thing. I really had faith. I had a lot of faith in the 2016 team that was led by Yogi Ferrell, won the Big Ten championship. That team beat Kentucky in the round of 32, but they got demolished by North Carolina in the Sweet 16. And that was for those of you who remember, I'm sure you do, that's the year where Villanova hit the buzzer beater on UNC in the national championship. But that's a year where I thought Indiana could have gotten to the Final Four, even though they were only a 4 seed. When you have a point guard like Yogi Ferrell, I just really thought I just thought it was meant to be, even though they weren't a favorite to get to the Final Four. And then clearly it wasn't meant to be.
I still think, what year was it? Boy. See, I'm getting to the point now I can't remember the years.
While you're thinking about that, I do want to ask you, and maybe we've talked about this before, but I want to hear your thoughts on the Purdue loss to Fairleigh Dickinson.
I mean, look, I don't know if people know how I grew up or where I grew up. I'm sure they figured it out by now if they follow me on Twitter. I'm going to tell you right now, I sent a text to my brother before that game was played. And when they kept talking about how Purdue had such a size advantage in that game, I thought this could be Heartbreak City for Purdue. Something about that game was like freshman guards. They keep talking about the size. Fairleigh Dickinson's got nothing to lose. Purdue's going to be playing on edge. I had a feeling that I'm not going to say I thought that they would lose because I didn't think they would lose, but I was going to be nervous about that game for a full 40 minutes. And turns out that was what happened. But I tell you what, I think the 2019 game against Virginia is still more heartbreaking because of the way that game ended. Because you look at how that whole thing unfolded. And by the way, I just want to point out here that as I'm letting it all out there and people are starting to know kind of how I grew up, my loyalties. Some people knew, some people probably don't.
Okay, so I'm not trying to out you as a Purdue fan. I thought people knew that.
No, I'm not. Here's the thing. I am also very unbiased. I don't hate Indiana. I'm not like that person. I try to give my analysis on stuff. But that 2019 game against Virginia still haunts me to this day because the free throw for that ball to go beyond half court to throw a pass over the outstretched arms of a 7'2" or 3' center, and for it to go into force overtime and Purdue to not get to the Final Four for the millionth time, to come up short. Boy, that was more devastating than losing to a 16 seed, in my opinion.
And not only that, Purdue lost to St. Peter's the year before, right? In the Sweet 16?
Yes, they did.
Purdue has had a lot of opportunities to get to the Final Four.
They've lost to a double-digit seed 3 or 4 years in a row because they lost to North Texas in that 2020 season. They lost to St. Peter's. Yep. Yeah, so 2019. So they lost. That would be when they lost to Virginia. So the last 3 seasons they've lost to a double-digit seed. Not good.
Yeah, and Purdue is going to have a chance to be successful again this coming season, and I think they're eventually going to have their time. And I really thought it could have been last year, but I mean, they still have Zach Edey, which honestly seems like, I don't want to say it seems like that was impossible to happen, but it's still hard for me to understand how big men are just invaluable in the NBA and that they can just continue to be these dominant players in college. They can just keep coming back. I mean, we saw what happened with TJD. We saw Oscar Tshiebwe. There's just been so many. Kofi Coburn did it a couple times before he eventually decided to give the NBA a shot. So I'm sure we'll keep seeing that unless the NBA game continues to change. But yeah, good topic, Dustin. I enjoyed that. We got a lot of responses, and that was interesting. Maybe we'll have to get Chris Denari's thoughts.
There we go. Yeah, he was a part of Butler for a while there. I'm sure he's dealt with some fun and some heartbreak. It'd be good to get his thoughts on some maybe some Pacers games that maybe still stick with him. That's a good, interesting topic because everybody's got that one game, that one moment that still, I don't care what anybody says, it still kind of haunts them, sits sits in the back of their mind. And as we saw, there's a lot of responses there. If you're a sports fan, I promise you that there's at least one moment in time, one game, one shot, one hit, whatever it might be, where you're just like, if I could go back in time and turn back the clock, I wish it would be different.
Yeah. One other one, and this is back to Indiana football before we take a break here. The Tax Slayer Bowl, the Gator Bowl against Tennessee for Indiana.
Oh,
it felt like the winner of that game, the loser obviously went one direction, the other went another, even though Indiana still had the successful 2020 year. But Tennessee, look what's happened to them. Anyway, just want to throw that one out there. We're going to go ahead and take our next break. Chris Denari coming up next here on Indiana Sports Beat Radio. It is the JTP Dustin Schutte takeover. We'll be right back with more right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
What's up, guys?
Good morning, Chris.
Hey,
morning,
how are you?
Doing good.
Great.
So we're the morning takeover. Where's Jim off to?
Jim is flying to North Carolina to see some family.
Oh, cool.
He never gets flights during the show, but I think he was forced to this time just based on timing. And so he had to leave it in our hands this morning.
Come on,
in the words of John Denver, he's leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again.
But didn't John Denver died in an airplane too, right? Isn't that
the song, he wrote a song. Yeah.
Leave it on a jet plane. Yeah.
It's just a creepy parallel that there is with that song.
I mean, that is true.
Someone else was on that same flight with him too. Wasn't it like Buddy Holly or something? I could be wrong, but
no, I don't think so.
I could be wrong. I thought there was two people who were on the same flight that were of significance, but
I only know his music. Anyway, how's Chris been?
Hey, it's good. Just all the rain. It's a ton of rain. But hey, I said the grass doesn't look like it's August. You know,
that's true. We've had we've had plenty of rain down in Kentucky. Usually by this time everything's dry looking, and kind of gross.
Yeah, that's why I said, guys. I mean, I was not hurt when they said, hey, this is our situation for the Brickyard. I'm like, hey. That's fine by me. I'll take the weekend. I did a poker game. I sat in as the analyst last week. I've done that twice this year. So that was my broadcasting for the summer.
So you just get to sit back and relax and enjoy it a little. Enjoy the weekend instead of being.
Yeah, I mean, I think our grandson's going to be over here on Saturday, so my son and daughter-in-law can do some stuff around their house, so we're like, hey, we'll take him.
Absolutely.
So we'll hang out. I was going to mow the lawn later today, but it's too wet. Not going to do it.
I'm getting to that point in the year where I'm like, I usually like cutting my grass and that kind of thing, but I'm getting to the point to where I'm ready for it to be done. I'm ready for the fall. I'm ready for October, November, and put that lawnmower up for the year.
Yeah.
John's ready for pumpkin spice season.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm ready for good coffee season for real. I'm not a big pumpkin spice person, but give me all the good coffee.
Yeah, that's what the gal at the Starbucks that I go to here in Carmel who runs it. She goes, I can't wait. The pumpkin latte is going to be close or whatever. Because I asked her, I said, do you ever get, you work in a coffee. Do you ever get tired of coffee? She goes, no, I like the different flavors, but I'm waiting for fall.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, here we go, guys.
Variety of freshly made fare, tying their roots in Limestone with their love of Southern eateries. With quality, local, and organic food as their main focus, Southern Stone strives to always provide their guests with an exceptional dining experience. With weekly specials, quick, attentive service, Southern Stone Restaurant provides delicious, 5-star comfort food with a Southern charm at 2-star prices. Southern Stone Restaurant is part of Endeavor Hospitality's Wow Club.
This segment is brought to you by Courtroom Sports Grill in Bedford. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back. It's the JTP Dustin Schutte takeover in for Jim Coyle today. Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Joining us now is Chris Denari of the Indiana Pacers. Chris, it's been a while since we've chatted. How you doing?
Yeah. I tell you what, the month of July for me felt a little bit like the season. I was not home very much, but all good things. We had a nice week-long vacation in Michigan. Went to South Carolina. I think I told you our second grandson was born. He's now a month old. We were in Boston and Portland, Maine last week for a nephew's wedding. So yeah, it's been a lot of travel. We're home for the bulk of August, and then we'll take off for South Carolina for about a week in September. And then, really you start getting ready for the season. The season will start a week later this year. And I think part of that might be because of FIBA World Cup that Tyrese Halliburton is a part of. But I think opening night on TNT is like Tuesday the 23rd. And I think Pacers, I'm sure, will play on that Wednesday the 24th. Training camp doesn't start. I think media day is the 2nd. Training camp starts the 3rd. So still, a lot of time off left. I think the schedule will be released sometime next week. So that's always important because then you see what your year looks like. So, but yeah, it's, this is probably the quietest time in the NBA. You don't see many trades happen, free agency, those types of things. This is sort of when everybody gets away a little bit. And so that's why it's a little bit quieter right now.
And I don't mean to dive too much into your travel plans all the time, but is that something you try to do over the summer? Because I think during the NBA season, it's such a grind. It's so many months. And even when you're not calling games, I mean, you're out at practice, you're doing player interviews, you're making notes and doing all these things. So when you get those breaks, I mean, are you trying to travel, or is that something you did this year because of so many different things going on? And usually you just like to relax during this time.
I mean, we try to have family time. There's no question about that because it's really hard to get, multiple days off where you could go do something from October to April. I mean, it's just really not possible. You're playing 3 to 4 games a week. You're on the road. I think a few years ago when the season, after the COVID year, when the season started right around Christmas, the All-Star break was later. It was in March. And so I was able to get down to Anna Maria Island with my wife, for a little bit. We traditionally try to do something during All-Star break, though I don't think that's really going to be the case this year because Indianapolis and Pacer Sports and Entertainment host the All-Star weekend. So I'm sure that I'll have some type of role in that. So yeah, you really try to focus on the summer and quite honestly, guys, that's why I like what I do. I mean, I love baseball. I mean, I am a big Reds fan. I think you guys know. But I think it would be very difficult to work in baseball because the weather is so nice. Living in the Midwest, we know down, where John is in Kentucky and Dustin's finally back up north where the weather is not as nice. But, in the winter, it's darker, it's colder. And so that's the time of year that I'm working. So I really try to take advantage of those summer months to do some things and get away.
Well, you mentioned the Reds. How do you feel currently about the state of? I feel like they've been so up and down since the All-Star break.
Well, I mean, I think if you would have told any of us that are Reds fans that on August the 10th, they still would be in play for the division as well as a wild card, I mean, you'd take that and run, right? Mm-hmm. At the All-Star break, they had the lead in the Central. They've really stubbed their toe. I think they've lost 7 of the last 8. I saw them in a stretch where they had won 12 in a row. So I look at it this way. I'm pleasantly surprised with what they've done. They've got a good young core. A lot of these guys have no idea what it's like to be in a race for the pennant or the race for the division or the race for the wild card. So I can't be too upset. I will say their pitching, though, yesterday they had a 4-1 lead going to the 8th, and you feel like all you have to do is lock that down, and they lose 5-4 in 9 innings. How does that happen? But again, I think for all the things that we've gone through as Reds fans over the years, it's a pretty bright future. I mean, there's a lot of good young players, so I'm excited about what I see.
So in the last segment, we were talking about moments in time in sports history, games, a shot, whatever the case might be, that still kind of haunt us. And I'm curious whether it's been in your broadcast career or as an athlete or just as a fan, is there a moment that sticks out to you? Because I talked about earlier in the show, I hate Michael Jordan, and it's because he stood in the way. I still think the 1998 Indiana Pacers were the best team to have possibly won a championship, and obviously he stood in the way of that. So that Game 7 from the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals still sticks with me. I think about it every single year. Is there a moment, whether you as a kid growing up or a play or a game or even a season that comes back and you're like, oh man, if I could go back in time, that's one that just kind of still haunts you to this day?
Yeah, I think there's a few. From a broadcast standpoint, I was the voice of Butler for 17 years. In 2000, the Butler made it to the first and second rounds down in Winston-Salem, playing the Florida Gators. And Butler missed 2 free throws inside the final 7 minutes, and Mike Miller got it, went coast to coast, made a shot at the buzzer to beat Butler. It was devastating because that was as great a chance as Butler had to win an NCAA tournament game. And that was a tough one. There's no question about that. I think about a game that I did call would have been 2017, 2018 playoffs, Game 5 in Cleveland. Oladipo does not get the goaltending call from LeBron James. It's tied. They run an out-of-bounds play, and LeBron hits a 3 at the buzzer to win Game 5. I really believe if the Pacers win that series, they ended up losing in 7. They won Game 6 by 40 or so. Yeah. I think they could have gone to the NBA Finals that year. I really believe that. I thought they were good enough in the East. And then I would say a game that I didn't do, but I was there, and it would have been it was either Game 1 or Game 2. Remember where Frank Vogel took Roy Hibbert off the floor in the Eastern Conference Finals in the Miami series, and they got the ball to LeBron, and he drove against Paul George and scored, and there was nobody there to protect the rim. The piece about that I always share with people is we were back at the hotel, and I got on the elevator, and I was on the elevator with Frank Vogel and Roy Hibbert and Chris Denari.
Oh, man.
And Frank apologized to Roy for not having him on the floor. He said, that's on me, Roy. I should have had you out there. So there's probably a lot of other games and a lot of last-second shots. And, I remember doing a game, Butler and Wisconsin Green Bay. I think it was Butler's – this was in the 90s, and it would have been the first game that they had on like ESPN or ESPN2. Dan Patrick did the play-by-play. Tony Bennett, now the coach of Virginia, hit a shot at the buzzer at Hinkle to beat Butler. And at that time, as I was a part of trying to, bring Butler up, that was a devastating shot because you just felt like on national television you had a chance to win. So those are some of the shots or so that I remember from a negative end. There's been a lot of great shots as well, but those are some of the ones that you'd like to have back.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you weren't a part of the broadcasting team whenever Butler was in the national championship.
No,
correct?
No, I was sitting at Lucas Oil Stadium. I was in that end zone where Gordon Hayward's shot was coming when it hit off the backboard in the back of the rim. And I still say that Butler going to back-to-back national championship games, and they didn't win either. They lost to Duke and UConn, is perhaps one of the best stories ever in college basketball. If they would have won that in 2010 and beaten Duke, that would have been, I think, the greatest story in college basketball history.
Yeah, that was one that some people had mentioned earlier. That's a shot that still sticks with me. And I think even for what it would have meant just for the state of Indiana, like obviously more so for Butler and Butler fans, but just for the state to do that in their home state, to pull that off in a miraculous shot. I mean, we would have had Hoosiers Part 2 being made right now if that would have happened.
I mean, you've had books written about it. If it would have gone in, you probably would have a movie. There'd be some Disney movie, starring somebody as Gordon Hayward hitting that shot.
Exactly. Well, Chris, I wanted to get to just a little bit. I know Tyrese Halliburton is playing in the FIBA World Cup, and I think sometimes what I find interesting, I should say, is with the NBA season kind of being nonstop, is I think players now have to, in addition to what they're doing throughout the NBA season, kind of have to find a balance of between what's training and what's too much basketball. I don't want to wear myself out. I don't want to risk injury. Obviously, Paul George had a devastating injury a few years ago when he participated in some non-NBA stuff. But Tyrese is also young enough. This is a great learning experience. I mean, what's kind of the mentality he's taking into this FIBA World Cup and these opportunities?
I think he's a leader of the Pacers, but he can be a leader of the national team. Right now, I think in game one, he came off the bench. He had 12 assists. He was really, leading that second unit on the fast break. I think it's an opportunity for him to learn from other players and what they're about. I just think anytime you can play in a different system and learn more about, those across the league, I think it does nothing but help you. And, they always have a great source of pride to wear the Team USA colors. So, yeah, you hope that nobody gets hurt. There's going to be a lot of NBA players playing in the FIBA World Cup. Again, I think that's one of the reasons that the season is starting maybe a week later. Really, if you look at the calendar, it's not even 7 days difference. It's only about a 5-day difference. But I think still when World Cup is over right around September the 10th, a lot of these players still will have 3 weeks or so before they have to report for training camp. But I think all these things are a positive. You see so many players wanting to do this, and it's just a special opportunity when you get to represent your country in either the Olympics or the World Cup.
And what I kind of have to remind myself about this too is it's not like players are just sitting at home on the couch eating potato chips watching Netflix. They are training, they are getting into some sort of rhythm. So why not play against and play with some of the world's best players? Give yourself an opportunity to get better. And I think it only helps him. I mean, he's said multiple times, even when he was an all-star, I'm proud of myself, but I've got a long way to go. And so I think that this is the next step in helping him develop, not just become, the player he wants to be, but be the player that the Pacers need him to be if they want to be successful in the Eastern Conference and maybe make a run at the NBA Finals here in the next couple of years.
And it also puts him in a great recruiting environment, right? I mean, we are seeing players want to play with somebody like Tyrese because he's unselfish. He's going to find you. I mean, he said, look, with the Pacers, I have to score a little bit more. He was a 2010 guy last year. He doesn't have to be a 2010 guy on Team USA. But I think we've already read some things where, players are saying, hey, I understand why guys want to play with Tyrese Halliburton. He's such a willing passer and such a good teammate. So I think in the long run, that only helps. Think about it. Tyrese has one more year this year left on his rookie deal, and then he signed a contract extension for 5 years with no team option, no player option. So he is committed to the Pacers through the 28-29 season, and I think that's huge.
And we do have a different NBA, and I'm curious now because you bring up a good point in his ability to now kind of recruit other players and showcase his abilities and what he can do for them. Has teams like Denver and Milwaukee winning an NBA championship help the Indiana Pacers indirectly, in which players can say, I know we're a small market, but we've seen small market teams win an NBA championship. We've got the right pieces. We are just missing, we just need leadership, or we need a 3-point shooter, or we need, somebody who can come off the bench and get us 20 points. Does the success of those other franchises put the Pacers maybe indirectly in a better spot?
Oh, no question. And I think you look at teams in the last year, Memphis, Cleveland, all up and coming young teams that aren't in, traditional big markets. And I think one of the great strengths about the NBA over the last 5 years, it's the first time in quite a while, you've had 5 different winners. You've not had a repeat NBA title winner. So I agree with you, Dustin. I think all of those things are important as you look to build your franchise and try to make it a championship contender.
Before we let you go, Chris, what are kind of your early expectations? As you said, kind of all the pieces have really fallen into place now. The offseason's kind of winding down. What are some of your early thoughts on what to expect from the Pacers this season?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to be difficult for Rick Carlisle and his staff, I think you've got a really solid roster. I think you have a fairly deep roster, and you have a lot of competition at a number of positions. What happens to the backup center position behind Miles Turner? You've got Daniel Tice, a veteran. You've got Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith. They cleared out the wing position a little bit by trading Chris Duarte to Sacramento and bringing in Obi Toppin at the 4. And so at the 4, you've got Toppin, you've got rookie Jarris Walker. Aaron Nesmith played a little bit of 4 last year. And then you've got, a lot of people in that, wing position. So I think that's one of the things as training camp shakes out. I think this is going to be a very deep roster. I think during the regular season, you can go much deeper than you do in the playoffs because you are playing 3, 4, 5 games a week. You're playing back-to-backs, and you want to give guys some significant rest. So I think that will be what I will find interesting early on in training camp is those battles for playing time because this is as deep a roster as we've seen the Pacers have had in a number of years.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see. Chris Denari with the Indiana Pacers. Thanks for joining the JTP and Dustin Schutte takeover for Jim Coyle, as it looks like Biscuit is making a cameo appearance on Dustin's camera.
Always love to see the dogs. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
We appreciate you, Chris Denari. Indiana Sports Beat Radio will be back with more. This segment was brought to you by Hoosier Hank's Pizza Mac and Courtroom Sports Grill in Bedford. We'll be back with more right after this.
We'll be right back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
If you're in the
All right, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Appreciate you.
All right, have a good one. I'll talk to you
too.
next week. All
See
right,
ya.
bye.
This dude is a bolt, too. I mean, he
I
will
love
bolt me
dogs.
over.
I love how they'll just assert themselves into anything.
You know what? If I was not talking to you, by the way, if I was just sitting here watching TV, he would not be doing this.
Because he knows you're giving attention to another human being, I guess, right?
Probably, yeah. He doesn't like when I talk on the phone either. So there's that.
By the way, Fred, you were asking what the best way to our podcast is. You can find us on YouTube. Just search my name, John Alden, or you can search Out of Touch. It's on my channel. It's not on the ISB channel. If you just search my name or search Out of Touch, you'll see the brown logo. And yeah, it's on YouTube. It's also on Spotify. You can do the exact same thing. And we'll probably talk a little more about the podcast here in this last segment, but that's how we're distributing everything.
All right, I got him a toy, so hopefully that distracts him for the last segment here.
There you go. This has been really fun.
This has been great.
I know we've done this before, but not when it's been planned.
And I don't know, it might be the first time we've done a full 2-hour show.
No,
Was there another time?
Vegas. I thought the one in Vegas where Jim was in his bed.
That's true. He was there, but it was mostly us. That's true. That's true.
I think that's the only one. That's the only other time we did a full one, I believe.
Ross says, anything new on the Pacers and Bally? Not that I'm aware of.
Or we did a full one when he flew back from Portland as well. Because he legitimately couldn't because he was in the air like he is today.
Okay, so you are right. Yep, that's a good point. We have done this a couple times, and it's just been a while. I mean, just running around. There you go. There you go. Chilling out now. People are saying that he's thought to be. Hold on. Yesterday, Russell says it was yesterday. Said Jalen Hood-Schifino was not considered a one and done, and I said this early after the college basketball season, and it was debunked by this site and another. All of a sudden, now people are saying that he was not thought to be a one and done. I thought he would be a one and done.
Who? Hood-Schifino?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he could be. I didn't know if he would or not. Here we go.
Brewing Company has an updated menu, new brews, and will be offered in all Endeavor Hospitality restaurants. Come taste with Dr. Hops' Brewing, Metalworks Brewing Company. Bring your passion and your thirst.
This segment is brought to you by K-Bello. Now back to the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios for more Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle, presented by Endeavor Hospitality Group and Andy Moore Honda of Bloomington.
Welcome back, Indiana Sports Beat Radio. The JTP and Dustin Schutte takeover. Final segment here on a Thursday. Big thanks to Chris Denari and Dylan Sinn for taking the time to talk with us today. It's been a fun show. We've talked a lot of conference realignment. Talked a lot of Indiana football, Big Ten football in general. Just talked a little bit of Pacers. Talked a little bit of worst moments. What would you call it, Dustin? Biggest heartbreaks in sports?
Yeah. I mean, it's not biggest heartbreaks. It's individual biggest heartbreaks, right? Biggest haunts.
Yeah, things in sports that haunt us.
Everybody's got something. Everybody's got something.
We've done a lot of. Gone over a lot of things, but one thing I do want to do, I mentioned this earlier in the show, and I think by this point, many of you, especially on the Andy Moore Honda hotline, have figured it out. We've mentioned our podcast, Out of Touch. Those of you probably also remember Dustin and I and Mitchell Page haven't mentioned. This is only 2/3 of the Out of Touch podcast. Mitchell Page is a part of it as well.
To help our listenership, we need to bump up that Mitchell played at Indiana and that he was in the NFL for a brief time. I feel like that's really going to help our numbers skyrocket.
I definitely mentioned it in the first episode. I did it for a couple of reasons. I guess people could see me trying to make him seem like a token, but which is definitely not. But I mainly said it for those who may listen and aren't Indiana fans, maybe aren't football fans in general, just kind of give a little bit of a background. But anyway, we used to be a football specific for Indiana football podcast. Well, we decided about a few months ago that we wanted to go in a different direction with it. We still wanted to do a podcast, and it's essentially we talk about our personal lives, talk about sports and entertainment in a way that we're really just not afraid to share stories that otherwise we probably wouldn't share on a show like this, just because it's not the platform for it necessarily.
Sure.
I mean, last night's show that will release next Wednesday went in a completely different direction that I didn't expect it to go in. And we ended up talking about a lot of, and I think we alluded to it earlier as well, talking about scary things in regards to ghost experiences. Mitchell has an incredible story about a family member who
paranormal.
Had some paranormal activity happen to them. And we also, all three of us shared some experiences of times where we may or may not have encountered some paranormal activity of ourselves. But you'll have to check out the podcast next week for that. That's not what the whole episode is about. We talk about a lot of goofy stuff as well. I have yet another.
It made a majority of that show.
It's definitely the back half of the show is dominated by that. But early on, we talk a lot about I have another homeless story for those of you who already listened to one of the other ones. I've had some interesting experiences working downtown at iHeart and talking about the people that I see and the things that I see going to and from downtown Louisville. So we go into a lot of different things. So hopefully you guys will check it out. You can find it on Spotify or YouTube, not under the ISB banner. It's under my personal banner, John Alden. And just search Out of Touch, and there's a brown logo, and we're planning on releasing episodes weekly, and not just in season as well, but all the time.
Mike says he's been on 2 ghost hunts. I'd like to know what hunt means. What about Russell says, what about being buried in the 1800s and not actually being dead? Yeah, we didn't dive into that.
That's scary though.
That's talking about personal frightening. By the way, so when I was in high school, I'm going to mention this because you brought up ghost stories, and I should have mentioned this on the pod, but I'm going to mention it here now because this stuff is so stupid, and this still sticks with me to this day. This is not a scary story. But when I was in high school, I don't know when eBay launched. I have no idea. I have no recollection, but I feel like this had to be 2004, 2005. So in the early stages of eBay, I feel like. There was on eBay, somebody tried to sell a haunted shop vac in which the description was basically that they sucked up a ghost through the shop vac. Yes, they were saying that they sucked up a ghost through this shop vac, and that the shop vac was then haunted because it was the ghost. And it reminded me, like, I don't know if people have seen the original Casper the Friendly Ghost, but I think in the movie they break out of a vacuum clean. I think that's how they capture.
They do it in Ghostbusters too, don't they?
Well, those are like proton packs or whatever those are.
Oh, okay.
But like an actual vacuum cleaner in the movie Casper the Ghost, they suck them up. So I'm thinking somebody stole that idea and was like, I'm just going to tell somebody I sucked up a ghost in this shop vac and
hilarious.
try to sell it. Now, whether or not it got purchased, I don't know. People buy weird stuff on eBay. But the fact that we just brought that back up reminded me. It should have been something I thought about last night. But that's there's some weird stuff. So apparently there's a shop vac out there with a ghost in it somewhere. Don't know if it's ever been empty.
I don't know if I can find this news story in time, but a couple of weeks ago in the town that I live in Mount Washington, Kentucky, there was somebody who recently got arrested. And I don't have all the details of the story right in front of me, but the guy who got arrested in Mount Washington was collecting skulls inside of his house and using them as decorations. And they weren't just like decoration skulls. They were real human skulls. And whenever the police went into his house to ask him about it, they asked him if anybody else was in there with him. And his response was, only my dead friends. And if that isn't creepy, I don't know what is.
Yeah, that's bizarre. That has to be breaking all kinds of laws. I mean, I don't know the legal system or the laws well enough, and I've never heard of something like this. So, but I feel like there could be jail time involved, hefty fines involved.
Yeah. Well, apparently he was buying these skulls from people on like the black market or something, and using a different name, and they were able to kind of trace it back to him. It was real
This
shady.
was in Kentucky?
This was in the town that I live in. Really? So I don't live close to the high school, but it was near the high school.
Okay.
So there you go.
I'm never coming to your town ever again. We'll continue to meet in Bardstown. We will continue to go to that spot we went.
The Scout and Scholar.
Scout and Scholar, good little spot, good meeting spot. Which, by the way, when we were on our Louisville trip, we went back there. Still good.
Oh, did you?
Still good. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, they changed their menu quite a bit. I don't know if it was the same kind of thing they had whenever you and I met, but they changed things pretty often.
I'm pretty sure it was the exact same menu.
Well, there you go. And I'll tell you what, one thing I've been meaning to do, speaking of food, since that's one thing we typically run to on this show sometimes, one thing I've been meaning to do that I still haven't, and you all have convinced me, I'm going to try Arnie's Pizza and see if it really is better than Pizza King. I know I've been a big Pizza King advocate whenever we have these Pizza King versus Arnie's debates, but I'm ready to jump into the dark side and see if Arnie's really is. Almost everybody on here says Arnie's is better. Not everybody, but most people.
I think you're going to be disappointed.
How come?
Don't build up Arnie's. I don't know how to say this. It probably is better than Pizza King, but it's not like a revolutionary, like life-changing type of
that's
pizza.
the thing. I'm not like Pizza King for me, it is my favorite pizza, but I know that a lot of that is rooted in nostalgia.
Yes.
So if Arnie's can at least channel that energy for me, that's enough for me. You know? By the way, we do have somebody, a commenter that I haven't seen today. He said, that guy with the skulls lives next to my best friend's cousin. Very disturbing. I can't believe there's somebody on this hotline that actually knows who I'm talking about, to be honest. So,
wow. Okay.
Shout out to J Minton 71 who's checking out today's show.
Kentucky,
Dustin, you'll have to dive into that. Take a look into that story and just.
I'm gonna have to do that in my spare time. You know the saying is like keep Austin weird. Talking about Austin, Texas, I feel like keep Kentucky weird. It would be just as appropriate.
Kentucky is weird, and I don't know all the details of this one either. I promise I'm not making this stuff up.
No, I believe you. It is
in a Louisville suburb. This was about a week ago. This is another similar situation. A neighbor who you would have never known this was going on unless unless you were just this person, unless, you know, they revealed themselves. But the FBI or somebody did a private investigation into this house, and it's like a hoarder house. But they thought that this guy who had recently been fired from some sort of like chemistry type of job, and I don't know all the specifics, like I said, but inside this guy's house, this person was building like explosives or bombs and stuff like that. He said he had no intention of using these for personal use, but he was selling them to people or planning to sell them to people. But through the undercover work of the authorities, you know, they were able to get a warrant and, you know, arrest this guy. And then eventually they had to clear out this guy's house because if something went wrong with the things he was building, apparently a few thousand people could have been killed from an accidental blast from this. So,
this doesn't surprise me. Yeah. I mean,
there's your interesting stories about the Commonwealth of Kentucky for today.
Now that we've gone into that aspect, have you seen yet Oppenheimer?
I have not. And
fantastic.
I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've also heard a lot of people saying that it's way too long and it's really slow. It definitely fascinates me, the idea of it. I don't know if somebody like me would sit through. Is it a 3-hour plus movie?
I think the time is 3 hours and 7 minutes. Now, what I will say is, so the theater near me here in Brownsburg, if you go in the morning before noon, it's less than $7 for a ticket. It's either $6.50 or $6.75. I can't remember. So it's less than $7. So what I do is I go to a little donut shop. I work at 4:00 on Sundays. So, and I don't like to just sit around and wait for my work to start. So I go down to the donut shop, have a coffee, have a couple of donuts for about an hour. Then I'll go to the theater. If there's a movie, I've seen Indiana Jones and I've seen Oppenheimer now. What I will say is the first hour of the movie was very slow. I will concede that. But the next 2 hours was very fascinating. It was very quick. It was very interesting. So if you can kind of gut out that first hour, then it moves pretty quickly. But that first hour, I will agree, it is pretty slow. It's long. I wouldn't blame you if you waited for it to come out on some streaming service or, you know, whatever. But it's worth I think it's worth the watch. It's very interesting.
I definitely think I'll dive into it, at least in some aspect at some point. Probably like you said, when it comes out on streaming services and stuff like that. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see with that. And then obviously the big phenomenon when that movie came out was not only Oppenheimer, but Barbenheimer.
Barbie.
People were dual watching Barbie and Oppenheimer. And that's another one that I don't think interests me. And Oppenheimer does interest me, just to clarify, but I don't think I'm interested in seeing the Barbie movie.
I am. Here's why. So I would say at first I was not, but I've had multiple people tell me it's fantastic. And I know, like, I understand, like, it's probably more of your and I type of thing, John, because I've heard there's like a lot of just kind of goofy humor in it, but there's also some deep stuff involved. Not like, I mean, it is intended probably for younger audiences, but it's not like super deep, like rom-com or anything like that.
I've seen the premise. If you said you have seen it or you haven't seen it?
I have not. I've just had multiple friends who have gone and seen it and have sent me text messages and have been like, dude, it goes. I probably won't see it in the theater, but I will see it once it streams.
I just think one of the weirdest things about if I were to see it in the theater is everybody dresses up to go see that movie. And that's just, I would feel very out of place.
Time out though. This would be my counter. I don't have a problem with it because
you don't have a problem with going in or you don't. Okay, go ahead and clarify. I know I'm stepping on your toes.
Well, no, you're fine. I don't care if people dress up. I don't care if people don't dress up, but I've seen people criticize, like, why would you get dressed up? Why would you wear all that? We wear football jerseys and basketball jerseys to sporting events all the time. It's the same concept. So what's it matter? Like, if you want to dress up, awesome. Cool. It's great. Like, do it. It's not, to me, it's no different. I don't understand the criticism of it. I
don't have an issue with it. I just myself, like, if I was going to go see it, I would feel very out of place because I'd be wanting just to see a movie. I'm not going to dress up in a bunch of pink and put a wig on or something.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody's going to judge you.
Oh, you mean for not dressing up?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, I got you.
If you wanted to just be John and go in a t-shirt and shorts, nobody's going to judge you. I just think people get like, again, you get really amped up for a sporting event, for a Pacers game. I'm like, I got to get my hat, I got to get my jersey. You know, I'm going to go do this and this, and it's the same thing for Barbie. It's a big event. People, I'm going to wear pink. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I love it. I love when there's enthusiasm about stuff. So, but to that point, if you were to just go in and what you're wearing now, well, I mean, I don't know. We're not going to get into that. But if you went in a t-shirt and shorts, then I don't think nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to care. Just go have a good time.
So there you have it. We're going to be wrapping up here shortly. Thanks again to everybody who stuck with us today. Obviously, this isn't the typical show that you normally get with Indiana Sports Beat Radio. We did talk a lot of sports, obviously. We chatted with Dylan Sinn and Chris Denari. But obviously, as we typically do, we went off the cuff. We talked about our own stuff. It seems like most of y'all had a good time, especially on the Andy Moore Honda hotline. So appreciate you guys sticking around. I'm sure this won't be the last time that Dustin and I do this. So we definitely will look forward to the next time we do it. And be sure to check out the Out of Touch podcast again on my YouTube channel or on Spotify. We got a lot of good stuff cooking up for that. And I can't help but look at this comment. Russell says, don't wear underwear only at Alden on the Air to anybody.
Yeah,
so
people might judge you if you do that. That's the one clarification I'll make. That. Yeah. So shout out to Jim Coyle for letting us do this morning. He'll be back with you tomorrow. He'll be doing the show from North Carolina, I believe. So we appreciate you guys as always. And until next time, we will see you on the radio. Thanks for listening to Indiana Sports Beat Radio. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page for more clips and team coverage of Indiana basketball, football, and more. You can also find full episodes and tons of other content on thehoosier.com. We'll see you next time for another edition of Indiana Sports Beat Radio.